popular Appalachian Trail. Sorry,
Sorry,
I've got something that just
There you go.
popped up on my screen here.
You're good. Sorry, I forgot to start the recording. You're good to keep going.
Okay, I can see the recording message on the middle of my screen, so I can't see. Okay, I'm gonna have to come out of this for just a second.
I just clicked the OK on mine and it went away, just to let you know.
Yeah, I don't have control of my mouse and I can't, let's see. Yeah, I think you're gonna have to remove me as the host for just a second.
All right, sorry, technical issues.
Yeah, I'm not able to get rid of the meeting being recorded box. Okay, I think I got it now.
Okay, cool.
All right, let's see. Let me go back to share screen here.
All right, sorry to derail us there.
That's okay. Let's see. All right, so you should be able to see my screen again and hear me.
Yep.
Cool. All right. We've got real strong seasonality. I think I was mentioning the Appalachian Trail. It's a real popular through hike. So we get a lot of through hikers coming through, both in the spring and then in the fall, depending on what direction they're headed, north or south. We've got a lot of seasonality. We've got hot summers, very cold winters, and then very unpredictable shoulder seasons with rain and snow and ice and everything in between. And like I said, our range of elevations, it's pretty substantial, 900 feet up to 6,600 feet. So heat illness, cold illness, all those sorts of things. We get about 150 EMS or SAR calls annually. That number is probably debatable, but that's what we get. We're pretty high up for a national park. We're not the highest. I think Grand Canyon has the highest number. Some of the main causes or main reasons we get these calls, trauma is by far number one with broken anything. We get a lot of motor vehicle accidents, vehicles into the river, motorcycles into the river, motorcycles off of steep embankments, those sorts of things. Fatigue and dehydration is huge. If it's not the chief complaint, it's a part of whatever complaint the patient generally has. We get a variety of medical illness. It runs the gamut: cardiac stuff, strokes, seizures, you name it, we get it. And then the last one is really more due to logistical type things. So poor planning. People start hikes too late into the day. They make navigation errors. They get off trail somehow and they can't manage to get back onto trail. And they just get stuck out in the dark and they don't have any flashlights. And they just have to rely on their cell phone. And then their cell phone dies. That's very, very common. So we just get distress calls for people who can't move because it's dark. Our average call time is about 6 to 8 hours. So that is a huge difference between us and, say, an urban setting. I mean, when I'm working on the ambulance, we're on scene for usually no more than 10 or 15 minutes. And then usually in the truck, no more than about 30 minutes. And we're in the park, on average, we're with patients. So this is the time from the time we receive the call to the time that we get the patient to the trailhead and get care transferred. So we're usually with them for a minimum of an hour, but 3 to 4 hours is pretty common. So patient care, it involves the medicine, but it also involves just, making sure that they're able to use the restroom if they need to, and making sure that they have food and water and all those types of things. The call times range greatly. I mean, it can be very quick, roadside, 15 minutes. Gatlinburg EMS or one of the very close EMS agencies is in to get the patient. I've been with people for over 24 hours, so the range is pretty high. You can imagine a lot of things that you have to do in terms of patient care over the course of 12 to 24 hours or greater than 24 hours. What does SAR kind of look like? We've got advanced life support. We've got basic life support in terms of patient care. We do have technical rope and swiftwater rescue teams. We have 3 light duty rescue trucks. We have a UTV that's EMS equipped. We have several trails that we can get UTVs onto, old road beds and things like that. Like I said, we coordinate with surrounding counties. Air medevac is something that's relatively new in terms of the Army National Guard. That's been within the last 5 or 6 years. So McGee-Tyson Airport, which is about an hour drive from the park, has a cadre of Blackhawks that are staffed with paramedics. So we can do direct hoist. They don't have to land. So we do that. We do about 20 to 30 of those probably a year. And we interact a lot with volunteer agencies. A lot of the surrounding counties have volunteer agencies that come in. If you're interested in what a top-notch volunteer agency looks like, I would encourage you to look into BUSAR, Backcountry Unit Search and Rescue. They're professional, top-notch, and they're out of Maryville, Knoxville, Tennessee. So check them out if you'd like. We also have an EMS bike program that is very, very new. We have an 11-mile loop that we close 1 day a week for bike-only traffic, and inevitably we get a lot of accidents on that day. So we have an EMS bike program where we've got a couple of providers out on bikes to cover that event each week. And all of this operates within, if you're not within an ICS structure, if you're not familiar with ICS, that stands for Incident Command Structure. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later on in the talk. Here's just some cool pictures. Starting left, going to the right, that's a National Guard medevac. Above, that's a very classic litter carryout. You can see our Stokes basket and our litter there coming across the bridge. That's our UTV there on the right, equipped for EMS. And that's one of our light duty rescue trucks down there at the bottom. So just some cool pictures. But how do we get folks out of the backcountry? We've got 5 to maybe 6 primary ways. Litter with Stokes basket is our primary method. That you can see that there in the picture. We've got new titanium lighter weight litters and Stokes baskets that we use. We walk a lot of people out if that's possible. We use horses as well, UTV again, and then our medevacs. Either we can do a point of care hoist, or we can get a patient to a landing zone where one of our community-based helicopters can come in, land, and take that patient to definitive care. So that was kind of the background of what we do in the Smokies, but the meat of the presentation is really on the lessons learned. I'm just sharing some of these, with the audience. And these aren't in any kind of order of importance. So they're just presented one after the other. The first one that I would share is what's really, really important if you're going to be doing search and rescue or wilderness medicine, wilderness EMS, is the basics. And it's not, when I say the basics, I don't mean the ABCs, airway, breathing, circulation. I mean simple stuff. So when you're going on a rescue, you need to make sure that you have water for not only yourself, but you need to be able to provide water to your patient. And I would encourage you to be able to make it if you need to make it. So be able to filter it, potentially be able to boil it, or somehow chemically treat it. I've gotten excited on some calls and ran out the door with all of my medical gear only to realize that I have no water for me or, again, for the patient. And that's not a good scenario to be in. Same thing with food. You need simple, high-calorie, high-fat stuff that you can be sustained on. Some of our rescues go well over 24 hours. So you need to think about those types of things before you go out. How long are you going to be out there? does the patient have any food? So make sure you have enough, again, for your patient and yourself. Shelter is a big one. You have to be able to change the environment around your patient. I showed that picture of the ambulance where we can take the patient and get them in that enclosed environment. You don't have that option out there. So you have to be prepared to do that. If you're going into a scenario where you're going to have to take care of a person for several hours and a rainstorm hits you and everything is soaking wet, your gear, you, the patient, everything else, that's just not a good scenario to be in. So you have to be prepared for that. So some kind of tarp shelter, a bivy sack. The picture on the right, this was a sick patient up at a shelter. She was a GI bleed patient, but she was just ill. And so what we did is she was staying in the shelter. We removed her from the shelter and isolated her in this tent. So we were treating hypothermia, or preventing hypothermia, I should say, but we also were isolating her from the other people that were in the shelter. I threw a tarp up there because a tarp has so many different uses. You can use it to make a shelter. You can use it to make a bivy sack. You can use it to just throw down on the ground to keep everything dry from, a wet ground, right? So it's kind of a multi-use item. I really like that as an item to carry. You could probably do the same thing with a trash bag, like a large Glad trash bag. You have to be able to provide warmth. So really like the Ready Heat blankets, the insulated puffy blankets that you can buy at, REI or any outdoor gear shop. I had a reporter ask me what piece of gear do I use the most just 2 days ago, actually. And I think my puffy blanket is probably number one. Because inevitably, once the sun goes down, it doesn't really matter what the temperature is. People tend to start getting cold, especially if they're laying on the cold ground or they're down by a river or something along those lines. I put emergency blanket, the tinfoil like survival blankets that you see. I'm not a big fan of those. They do have their place, but the problem is they don't stand up very well to wind and rain, and they rip very, very easily. So while they are useful, I would not rely on them. And I've learned that lesson kind of the hard way. You have to provide light, again, for yourself and potentially for your patient, especially if it's going to be a walkout kind of scenario. All I'll say on this is extra batteries. Make sure you're checking your batteries in your pack. And, 6 months goes by, remove those batteries and put new ones in, especially if you haven't used your light. And then a couple of other things, build your skill set. Take as many trainings as you can take that really increases your tactical abilities, meaning know ropes, know how to tie some basic knots, get swift water training. If there's a UTV class, take it. If there's a chainsaw operator class, take it. If you can learn, if snow is something that you're dealing with, learn how to drive a snowmobile or some of those other vehicles. The more that you can do, the more useful that you can be, and the more that you can affect a rescue without needing additional assistance, essentially. And then also classic in wilderness medicine, be able to improvise, have multi-use items, improvising shelter, improvising patient packaging. What can you use to splint? What can you use to isolate a sick patient from other folks in their group? What can you use to improvise personal protective equipment? I don't carry a gown with me into the backcountry, but I do have a rain jacket. And so I can use a rain jacket as a gown, if the scene is going to be, in a scene that requires that kind of protection. So those are some basic things. Another one that I've learned is reporting. And when I say reporting, I mean the reports that come from the patients or from the reporting parties. They can be very, very hit or miss. And they're often not very good. Most of our SAR calls originate as the following: either second or third-party reports. In other words, there's a person injured up on a trail. They're not mobile, so they send another person down the trail to get cell service to then call in, or maybe it's passed along to different people. And I'd say everybody in this chat knows that, the more the story gets passed on, the more it changes. So it's very hard to get good reports. Broken cell phone calls. Sometimes it's just a dropped 911 call without any information. All it is we can get a ping on the location of the phone and the fact that it was a 911 call. And then we have to make a decision. Do we go or do we not go? And those are challenging decisions to make. Garmin device alerts have gotten a lot more popular. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with the iPhone 14s, because it sounds like those have a similar ability. Generally, there is no medical training on scene. If we do, sometimes we do get a doctor or a nurse or a pre-hospital provider on scene, and that is really huge because if we can speak to them, we can get a good scene size up. That's generally not the case. And then, of course, time from incident to the report, to us receiving the report, is pretty important. I mean, if an hour's gone by between the incident and when we get word, a lot can change in an hour. Things can get a lot worse. Things can get a lot better. So it's a real challenge. The picture on the right was a medevac that I did actually about a month ago, and this was a call, came out about 9 p.m. The staff member on scene did not have any medical training. They suggested that this 20-year-old female was just exhausted and that she would be able to stay overnight at her camp without any issue. And so we took that report and said, okay, why don't we check in with you all the next morning, 8 a.m., and we'll see how things are going. And by the way, call us at any point things get worse. Well, the following day comes, we call up there, and the reporting party says, I think she's gotten worse. So I got on scene about 2 hours later, about 6 miles up the trail, and basically she was a diabetic ketoacidosis, raging DKA. She was an undiagnosed type 1 diabetic is ultimately what she was. So we flew her out. She was in ICU for 2 days. She needed an insulin drip, of course. But the original report was really, really bad. And we probably missed the boat on that one a little bit. We probably should have gone up that night, but we waited until the morning. So all ended well. But that's just one example. This incident was 6 miles up a trail and it was already dark. And so do we go in the middle of the night? We don't like to do that necessarily, but we will. In this case, we held off. Fortunately, we were able to make contact the next day and get her to where she needed to go. Sorry, that was the event that I just explained, so I can skip that. Pain management is a big one. In the pre-hospital setting, on an ambulance, I compare that to what we do on an ambulance, and I think we do a lot more pain management in wilderness EMS. That's because we're with people for so much longer. Oftentimes it's going to be a very bumpy ride out, and there's a lot of opportunity to make things worse. So this is one of our major pieces of our protocol. But use the basics first. POC, position of comfort. Do what you can to get them in the most comfortable position you can. And always, always, always manage body temperature. If I've got a broken leg, that's going to hurt. If I have a broken leg and I'm shivering because I'm cold, it's going to hurt a lot worse. So I have to manage that factor. So position of comfort and managing body temperature can do an awful lot for you. Splinting, I have to say, in the urban environment, we're kind of poor at splinting. In wilderness EMS, you have to be a good splinter, in my opinion. And so if you have the opportunity, take a training on that. There's a lot of organizations, Solo, Knowles, Wilderness Medicine Associates. They have a lot of great courses that can teach good splinting technique. I wanted to share some of the medications that we are able to give and our routes of administration. So we can give analgesia by mouth, we can give it IV, we can give it intramuscular, we can give it intranasally, and we can give it intraosseously. I highlighted intranasal because that is, in my opinion, very important, especially for wilderness EMS. If it's cold or you're having trouble getting access to your patient, we can always do something IN and not have to expose them. So I think that's really, really important, provided that we have appropriate vital signs and those sorts of things. But just starting at the top, acetaminophen plus ibuprofen, 1,000 milligrams, and all this is protocol dependent, of course. But 1,000 milligrams plus 600 milligrams, you'd be surprised what that can do for you. Those two synergistically work a lot better than one by itself. We also have Toradol. That's a really, really good medication for, I have found, mild to moderate pain. We do carry fentanyl. Wonderful drug. Our starting dose is 25 to 50 micrograms for adults, which I believe is about half of the starting dose for an urban or an ED setting. So our doses are relatively low. Again, the intranasal route is really, really important for that. And then lastly, and this is relatively new to us, probably within the last 6 months, we now carry ketamine. As most of you know, analgesia and or sedation. We're not sedating people, but we are providing pain relief. And we have found that 0.2 to 0.3 milligrams per kilogram is outstanding for pain. With that dose, you're not going to sedate a person. You're not going to put them into that place where they're having, vivid dreams and they're sort of going into that sedated place. But it's important how you give it. And so we had some lessons learned with this, but ultimately, a slow IV push, IVP, over about 90 seconds, or our protocol prefers, we'll take our dosing and we'll dilute it into a much smaller normal saline bolus, and then we'll run the dosage over about 5 minutes. And we've had really, really good success with those two methods. For pain control, and this really fits. This is our major trauma people. These are our broken femurs. These are our broken pelvises. A multi-system trauma, a person that's been ejected from a motorcycle and has a broken arm and a broken leg and all those sorts of things. So this has really made a big difference for us in what we can do. Heuristic traps. This was the big one. This isn't a presentation on heuristic traps. I'm not going to go into great detail about it, but what is it? It's really a shortcut that leads to human error. Classically, many of us have heard leaves of 3, let it be. In other words, poison ivy has 3 leaves, so you don't touch it. But there's a lot of plants that have 3 leaves that are fine to touch. So that's an example of a heuristic trap. I highlighted familiarity and consistency. Those are the two that I want to talk about just a little bit, because what I see happen a lot, and it's a huge pet peeve of mine, is that a report comes out, it's, let's say, oh, this person fell and they have a bloody nose, or this person fell and they have a broken ankle. And this is like the 50th broken ankle on this same trail for the year. And so you tend to fall into this trap of, oh, it's just another broken ankle, or, oh, it's just a minor thing. And then it turns into something that's much, much bigger. And I can't tell you how many times that's happened. We have a trail. Laurel Falls Trail is a paved trail. It goes up to a waterfall that's really very, very popular. It's our most accessed trail. And it's a simple trail to hike, and it's just down from one of our major visitor centers. And we get a lot of minor stuff. Every once in a while, though, we'll get something bad. And so not falling into that trap is really, really important. The patient there that you see us loading onto our Lifestar helicopter, I was up on trail with her. The report came out. She tripped, she fell, and she's got a bloody nose. That was the report. And I got to her, and she was awake, but she was kind of in and out of responsiveness. She had a major head injury. She had a broken leg. And we got her, we did a lot for her, got her the trailhead ambulance transport to this field that you see here, and got her loaded on the LifeStar and got her to the University of Tennessee Medical Center. So what was a broken nose was actually an emergency. Clinical assessment and patient care. I think especially in the emergency department setting, but even somewhat on an ambulance, we're very used to having a lot of tools at our disposal. CTs, x-rays, we can get blood work, ultrasounds, EKGs, all those things. Most of that is, you're not going to have most of that. I put stars by ultrasound and EKG because that's a little different. We don't have ultrasound, but I've definitely seen it's being used in wilderness medicine. EKG, again, it depends on your capabilities. We can do a 3-lead. We cannot do a 12-lead. But by and large, you're not going to have those things. So the clinical part of the whole thing really relies heavily on physical exam. You're going to fall back on that for all the decisions that you make. You kind of have to be good at making assessments over the phone or even over text. A lot of the stuff comes in via that way. And so it's almost a form of telehealth where you're trying to figure out what is the injury, how hurt or sick is this person with very, very limited information. Sometimes you can have a phone conversation. I always err on the side of caution. It's really hard to rule stuff out because you're just so limited with your tools. And because you're so far from definitive care, I always err on the side of caution. Evacuate, get that person to definitive care. They can always deny, continuation of care, and that's fine. They'll sign off on the appropriate forms. But otherwise, standard of care, we bring the urban standard of care to the patient. So I'll just leave it at that. Protocols, very, very important to fall back on that. Again, in the ambulance, it's right there for us to grab. In the backcountry setting, you really need to fall back on that. We use the Triple P app that's there on the right. We have all of our protocols uploaded to that, so we can access those offline, which is outstanding. And we do rely a lot on medical direction, medical control. It's a little different. Urban setting, we're going to call for medication orders and those sorts of things. In the wilderness setting, it's kind of different. I've called our medical director many, many times just to discuss a case, just to say, hey, this is what we have. Do you think we need to go now, or can this wait for the morning? And we just talk it out. So that's a little different. We're very fortunate to have a very active medical director. He's accessible 24 hours a day. I've never not had him answer the phone. So that's really, really important for a SAR team or a wilderness medicine team. Just some tools that typically we carry. This is what we have: a stethoscope. Some of us have eco devices, and I should say I have no financial interest in any of this. I'm just talking about things that we carry. Manual BP cuff. We have pulse oximetry, glucometer, thermometer, pen light. A couple of devices though that are kind of new that I wanted to at least show you all. One is called the EMA capnograph, and the other one is Athena wireless vital signs monitoring. This is the Athena. This Bluetooths to a phone. We can get a 3-lead with this. We can generate trend reports with this. PDF, again, it Bluetooths to your phone. And we can take blood pressure and heart rate on a patient as we move down the trail without having to stop the litter to do that. And that's a really, really big thing. If you have to stop the litter, that means you have to stop about 12 people or however many it is. You have to get access to your patient. Maybe it's cold outside. You have to expose them and those sorts of things. So there's always this really, do we continue to move or do we stop to get vital signs? How sick are they? How long is it going to take to get those vital signs? And how important is that relative to, is it more important to just get them to the trailhead? That's really, really tricky. This device, which we only got about 3 weeks ago, is really a game changer for us. So we have 2 of these, and we're starting to deploy them, and we really, really like them. The Emma, this is the Emma capnograph by Massimo. It's a capnography device, so it's in line with an ET tube. It's also in line with the BVM, and so you can get an ETCO2 value, you can get a respiratory rate off of it, and it also gives you a waveform. You can see we kind of take it, and so what I've got it connected to a non-rebreather mask here. So I've ripped the non-rebreather bag off, the reservoir bag, and I've taken some electrical tape, made the adapter a little thicker, and then put it into the non-rebreather mask. So a patient who is awake, spontaneously breathing, maybe they have something metabolic going on, we can get a vital sign for that. So it's a pretty unique device. All of the ALS providers in the park, we all carry one of these on us. Pretty neat things. And then, of course, very important for a CPR, cardiac arrest type of situation as well. I wanted to share this with you as the last clinical assessment piece. This David Pfeiffer, again, I think I mentioned him in the beginning. Friend of mine up in Kentucky, and he's a wilderness medicine, wilderness EMS guru, and he shared this with us in one of our trainings with him, and I thought he was spot on with the flow of assessment in a wilderness setting. And so verbal contact, of course, that's the first thing we're going to do. You'd be surprised. Most people in a wilderness environment, they don't know who is coming to help them. They have no idea that there's SAR teams coming or who's coming. So making verbal contact and telling them like who you are, if you're within an organization, those types of things are very important. Rapid access, meaning you have to get to the patient. That can be that can be hard, if they're down a steep slope, if they're in a river, if they're stuck in a tree, any of those types of scenarios. So you have to have the tactical knowledge and the gear to be able to access them. Maybe that's on a rope. And then organized assessment. March is the algorithm that I really like. ABCDE and XABCDE, it doesn't really matter. March, massive hemorrhage, airway, respiration, circulation. But then that last H, I think, is pretty important. Hypothermia, heat illness, any of those kind of environmental things that are unique to the wilderness environment, and then maybe head injury as well. So it's just a good reminder, how critical are they? That assessment is going to answer that question. Spinal rule out, secondary exam, looking for additional problems, make your problem list. You're going to treat based on what you find. And then the last piece, making an evacuation decision, providing ongoing care as you evacuate this person. And reassessment, I think, is really important. A lot more time for reassessment in the wilderness environment. For example, splint, recheck the splint. Maybe that leg is swollen, right? And their pain, it really isn't related to the initial break. It's more related to the fact that their leg is swollen and now it's compressed in that splint, right? So just one simple example. I know I can see that I'm running out of time here to talk, so I'll kind of speed it up a little bit. Organization, what to bring. It really depends on the location. It depends on the demographics, like what do you think is going on with your patient, the distance to definitive care. Are you a half mile up the trail or are you 10 miles up the trail? And then the quality of the report. I think that's a big one because you don't want to get yourself in trouble, fall into the trap, oh, it's just a broken ankle, or we don't really have much to go by. I'm a big believer in just taking everything. And then if you don't use it, great. This was a patient that was complaining of shortness of breath about 9 o'clock at night. He was 9 miles into the backcountry. Typically, we don't fly at night. Typically, we don't get on trail at night. I made the assessment over broken cell phone call. I called one of my coworkers. We got on trail at 2 o'clock in the morning, got up to him, and he had a 20-year-old with a spontaneous pneumothorax is what he had. So very interesting call. We ultimately flew him out. But with limited information, we opted to just take everything, and we actually took an air tank. We took oxygen with us, which was quite a distance to haul the oxygen, but I'm glad we did in the end. I would just say, organization-wise, this is my pack. Modular, I think, is the way to go. Again, wilderness, very chaotic. You might be beside a river, the wind might be blowing, rotor wash under a helicopter. Things can blow away, things can get lost in the dark. So just compact, modularized, where you can find it, know where everything is. And just remember, what you bring on your back is what you have. Patient packaging is a very, very big deal. Meticulous is important. Organized is very, very important. This is what we tend to go for. This is the rescue Randy, the mannequin there on the left, is secured in one of our litters, and we've got what we do is we put a hasty harness on all of our patients, and then we tie the patient to the litter with Purcell Prussics. Those are those two lengths of rope that you see there. And then we also have our seat belts that we incorporate into that system. And so you can see the patient there on the right. She had 2 broken arms. It was a bad day for her. But you can see the hasty harness on her there, and she's tied in just like the mannequin. We have had a couple of incidents where the litter tips. It's inevitable. Trails are narrow, and you don't want a patient to fall out of the litter. That would be a very, very bad mistake. So with our system, that cannot happen. Always focus on comfort, warmth. You can see the pad underneath the patient there. Make it safe for them. Make it accessible. Like, are you going to be able to stop and get vital signs on them? If you have to get an IV access en route, can you do that? Are your lines and tubes organized such that they're not getting snagged and pull out? And lastly, ADLs, activities of daily living, right? A person has to use the restroom. They have to sit up to get something to drink. They have to get something to eat. They have to throw up. So you have to get them on their side. All of those considerations, you kind of have to have that like pre-planned in your head. Like, if this comes up, how are we going to manage it? Because right now they're, compressed into this litter because that's the safest way for them. So think through all of those things. And then my last slide, we operate again in an ICS structure, crew resource management. It's a big deal. By and large, this is what our rescues look like. We have an incident commander. We have a hasty team that gets to the patient initially. Usually that's 1 to 2 responders. Usually that's the medical lead is part of the hasty team. But then we'll have a medical team lead. Again, that's usually the highest level of care. We have a litter team lead. So that's the person who manages the litter and all the logistics, getting the litter ready, managing all the people that are on the litter. So the medical can focus on the patient. The litter team lead does all the other stuff. And then we have a communications lead, a person who's kind of hands off from the litter or from the patient care, and they can communicate with our IC or with our dispatch or whatever it is. And then we just have a safety, everybody's safety, but sometimes if we have enough personnel, we will assign one person as the safety, just to make sure that we have our T's crossed and our I's dotted and all those sorts of things. And so ICS is a big thing. If you don't, this is one of those training pieces. If you don't have any knowledge of ICS, I would encourage, there's some online trainings you can take to kind of familiarize yourself with that. So yeah, that's about all I have. Thanks so much for listening to me. I'll take any questions you have, and my contact information, my email is there. Feel free to email me with anything you have. I'll get back to you.
Man, that was a cool talk. Thanks, Josh. If you want to stop your share, we can go back out to the gallery view.
Sure. Let's see. Stop share. All right, I stopped.
I have a few questions here. If you want to ask your question aloud, you're welcome to go to reactions and then raise hand. We can call you out. But I'll give a start. Folks doesn't want to unmute themselves. I'll get us started here. So you talked about the kind of false positives, or you talked about the different tracking modalities, whether it's 911 call or the Garmin watch. Now we have the iPhone 14. Are you guys tracking those for false positives and like using that data to weigh into your go or no go, or is everything just a case by case basis?
It's good. It's case by case basis. We get a lot of false activations. Hopefully, because once we get an activation, we try and make contact. And if we can't make contact, then we go. Within a reasonable amount. We may try and make contact for about an hour, especially if it's just an alert and there's no text message or other information with it. But if we don't get anything, we have to go.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, I see August with the hand raised.
Hey, thanks so much for the talk. It was awesome.
Yeah.
Question. So it sounds like, and you alluded to this a few times, that, once you're out there and on your way to the rescue scene, you're kind of on your own, and whatever you have with you is what you have to take care of the situation. So I'm curious, once you get the call and the decision is made that you're going to go, what's your process for kind of like your pre-brief and pre-thinking through and coming up with your plan of attack? Like, hey, this is what we're bringing, this is who we need, this is how we're going to get there, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a great question. So my pack stays with everything that I need for any scenario within our protocol. If I'm very confident that it's just, a minor ankle injury, or it's just a fatigue, dehydration, and they're going to need fluids, I've got everything modularized so I can take things out. Like if I know there's no injury, maybe I remove the module that I have to control bleeding and do all those sorts of things. So I sort of lighten the load, if you will, as much as I can, ensuring that I can still take care of the patient. Having done this for 10 years, weight starts to matter, basically. When I first started it, I would just take everything and it wouldn't matter, but now it does. And in terms of how quickly we go, if the call comes out and it seems like it's going to be a multi-system trauma or this patient is very sick, we will get 1 to 2 people on trail as quickly as we can. And then we start organizing our litter team and our additional resources immediately and get those resources to the trailhead. And then if we need to cancel, we cancel. It's kind of one of those scenarios where we can send the kitchen sink and it's very easy to cancel. But if we underestimate it, it's a lot harder to get resources moving that direction. So we'd rather err on the side of caution and cancel rather than call up, because the situation's worse than what we thought. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Awesome, go for it, Nate.
Hey, thanks for the talk, Josh. I'm wondering, do you know how common these EMS bike teams are? And if they are common, like who else is doing them?
Yeah, so I don't know of another park that does it, but I should caveat that with I actually haven't really looked into what other parks are doing it. They're much more common in urban settings. EMS bike patrol. I live in Knoxville, Tennessee. We don't have an EMS patrol here, but I know of cities that do. But by and large, they're very unique, not common. Yeah.
So, go ahead, Sarah.
Is your litter titanium? I couldn't tell from the photo, and my
Yes.
team just ordered one, and we're super stoked because it takes like 12 of us with our old clunker.
Yep.
Does it reduce the size of your team with the titanium litter? Can you get away with fewer folks?
Well, yeah, yes and no. We had the exact same issue. I would say our titanium litter is about a third of the weight of our old litter and Stokes basket. So it's just the ease of getting it up the trail is it's just a lot better. It's a lot easier to manage. And yeah, I think you're right. It does reduce the number of rescuers that you need. It also kind of reduces the incident of, rescuers getting exhausted, because you're not having to push this huge clunky thing up the trail. That's probably the biggest one that I've noticed, is that people aren't as tired using that litter.
There was a question in the chat from a guy about how you position a patient with shortness of breath or vomiting. And then I suggested, we have the big full body kind of vacuum splints. And so we've been able to use that to shape and position, but I thought maybe you had a different suggestion.
No, I mean, you're spot on. The vacuum mattress is one way to do it. We use the lateral position quite a bit. Especially at risk of vomiting. We try to be proactive. That one of the things we do, we give Zofran prophylactically a lot prior to our carryouts to try and prevent that from even happening. With the head injuries, I'm sorry, was head injuries the other one as well?
Did any shortness of breath or vomiting, like a severe?
Shortness of breath. Yeah. We can position a patient in the kind of semi-Fowler's position, getting backpacks behind them. You can still secure them safely in the litter and have them seated upright. At least semi at a 45 for sure. We've done that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. I see a question from Donald Eno about, do you use the rugged IV system?
The rugged IV system? Huh. No, I actually haven't heard of that. No.
It's military uses it where they have the one catheter that's in, and that's really secured, and then they have another catheter that goes in into that hub, so that if something gets pulled out, the catheter that gets pulled is not the one that's actually inside the. I've seen a couple of different ways to do it. So just considering you're moving these people around a lot, I'm just wondering how you ensure that your lines don't get pulled and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's and no, we don't use that. I've not heard of that. I'll pass that on to my EMS coordinator. But we use Coban a lot. So we'll get our IV placed, we'll tape it down really good, and then we'll Coban it. And then I think one of the most important things is when communication with our litter team, everyone knows we've got an IV in the right AC. Here's the tube. Be very mindful of that tube, of that line. So that's probably our primary way. And we try to use colors, so Coban it with like bright orange or something like that so that everybody can see it, and those sorts of things.
On a related question, what for the cold environments, how are you keeping, do you have line warmers and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So if it's cold, I'm packing so we carry 500 cc bags. So I'm packing those against my personal body, moving up trail. So when I get to the patient, I've already got body heat. And then we carry the large ready heat packets. And so I should have pointed it out in the picture of the patient in the tent. We wrap the saline bag in the ready heat chemical packets, and that maintains an acceptable temperature. But yeah, that's definitely a thing. You don't want to put cold fluid into a person who's sick, for sure.
Yeah, I had one last related question, and we're at 7, so maybe we'll wrap it at that. But are there any medications you have to regularly exchange because of the extremes of heat or cold, and be worried about them losing effectiveness?
Yeah, that is a huge question. The Park Service actually did a study on the medications exposed to heat and cold and those sorts of things. You can probably Google it and find it. But one of the biggest ones that loses its efficacy is Narcan. So Narcan has to be regularly exchanged. Efficacy can go down by 50% or more in as little as a couple weeks if it's exposed, especially to heat. But yeah, that's a thing. And all I can say to that is we try to not leave our bags in vehicles sitting out in front of ranger stations and things like that. We try and bring them inside, and we do our best with that. But yeah, that's a concern. We change out meds routinely about every 6 months, but Narcan is a unique one.
Awesome. Well, I've got the questions and answers we will put on the sites. We will put the recording up on the sites. Sorry, I got to start a little late. This was an awesome talk, Josh, and thanks for a great audience out here. We had, I think, 60 people, which was it's a really good turnout. So thanks again, everyone, for coming out, and we'll see you in 2 weeks for our next lecture.
Awesome. Thanks. My pleasure. Take care now.
Sean.
Have a good night, everybody.